That's Nick.
And that's Joseph, and today we're here to talk about On the Record, the latest documentary directed by Kirby Dick and Amy Ziering, premiered at the 2020 Sundance Film Festival and will be available to stream on HBO Max May 27th, 2020.
What other documentaries have they done?
Ziering previously produced many of Kirby Dick's documentaries. This is the first time I think she's co-directing, but they were nominated for Oscars on The Invisible War in 2012, The Hunting Ground, about the college campuses, where the rape culture on college campuses. I think Lady Gaga had that song for that.
Oh.
You've seen Outrage, I believe, 2009 documentary he did about a man being molested by a Catholic priest.
Okay.
And then I also enjoyed his documentary, This Film Was Not Yet Rated, which was about the MPAA rating system in this country, our new censorship. Yeah.
All right. Well, On the Record is about the allegations of sexual misconduct against Russell Simmons. Mm-hmm. And it focuses mainly on one woman's story.
Drew Dixon.
So yeah. What do you want to say?
These documentaries are sometimes exhausting to sit through, not because of just the nature of what men have been able to get away with forever, and this is a testimonial, and I think that it's important that obviously that we listen to the victims, and I think you had made a comment that resonated with me after we watched it, is maybe one day we won't need these kind of documentaries anymore, but until now, this is still something that exists.
Well, I wrote down notes. I think this is an important piece of cinema, I guess. I mean, I feel like it's not really like a movie to be enjoyed. It's just kind of like you said, a testimonial, and hopefully it affects change and allows people to feel like it's. To me, the purpose of something like this is to create an environment where people feel safe to share their experiences, which will deter people from doing these terrible things.
So the film starts out a bit with, talking about Me Too, the Me Too movement in 2017 after the allegations against Harvey Weinstein, and kind of how black women were left out of that mix. And so there's a brief rundown of why... hypothesis for why that is, race loyalty, how the white majority culture is already tearing down black men. So the women that are mistreated aren't ever allowed space to kind of speak up.
I think this film the documentary did a good job, similar to the OJ, was it Made in America, the 8-hour?
Yeah, I mean that's more extensive. But
sure, but I think this documentary also does a good job of setting the backdrop for the environment that Drew Dixon was in, that sort of allowed this not only to happen, but what made her feel like she couldn't speak out.
One of the commentators put it how it was baked into, this misogyny was baked into the culture, and I really liked how that sounded, because that's what makes sense, because it goes over the rise of hip-hop and misogynistic lyrics and how those became ingrained in the music videos. What was the term everybody used to use? Video hoes, the women that all looked a certain way, that set the standard for that cultural beauty.
Well, the documentary also explains hip-hop didn't start like these misogynistic lyrics and images aren't, it talks about how there are, all types of genre have lyrics that
right, yeah, and
demeaning to women and create an environment where women are seen as objects. And,
it's historical, and also that's not just what hip hop is about, obviously, either. But
so I guess to get into the nitty gritty, so Drew Dixon talks about her time under Russell Simmons at Def Jam. Mm-hmm. So she basically was like an A&R rep, and specifically the sort of the meat of her accusation is one night after an industry event, she is walking home and sees Russell Simmons. He asks her up to his apartment because he wants to call her a car, but he's doing this game that other women also sort of corroborate, where he tries to get them up to his place to either have them listen to a piece of music or something. And he convinces her to go into his bedroom to find this piece of music, and then shortly follows her in naked with a condom on, ready to have sex with her. And he forces himself on her. Yeah. So that's like the meat of it. But she also outlines all of her time at Def Jam, where he was coming into her office, exposing himself, attempting to kiss her, and how she would rebuff his advances. She also spends a little time talking about Lyor Cohen, who was the president of Def Jam, who kind of, she doesn't make any claims against him as being sexually inappropriate, but sort of like the animosity he had towards her because, as she says, she was another tall, skinny bitch who Russell brought into the office. So just by her telling, it seems like this was an issue that was
like with Weinstein, an open secret this kind of behavior was.
But the film does a really good job of explaining. So initially, I think for me, sort of when I not after watching this film, but I think when I started to understand about sexual misconduct and how hard it is for people to tell their stories, I think initially I would wonder, like, why do we need to spend so much time learning about this person? But now I understand, like, we need to spend time because we need to understand, like, Drew Dixon is a real person with a real life and a lot at stake. So for her to come out is, it's scary. There are a lot of consequences to that, like how her culture will see her community, future employers. Like, this effectively could ruin her life coming out, but she's doing it anyway because it's important for her. It's important for other people to understand this happened.
Yeah, and like inadvertently that touches on other subjects like light privilege, because she's a light-skinned woman of color, and how that plays into this. Who we seem worthy of being able to come forward to the privilege of having their story told. And she uses a phrase that also resonated with me. It was about time to talk about the plunder of black women, because so often their stories aren't told. And, of course, reminded of Surviving R. Kelly and how for decades was able to get away with treating black women a certain way because nobody's there speaking up for them. Nobody cares.
So, and Drew Dixon brings up two examples as to why she was afraid to speak up. One was Anita Hill, who came out against Clarence Thomas during his when he was being nominated for Supreme Court, and how the media ate Anita Hill alive. They have specialists, like mental health specialists in the documentary, talking about why these things are so important and detrimental to why people don't speak out, and talking about how, like, the victim in these sexual misconduct instances, they have to bear the brunt of, like, the nastiness of it. So, like, Anita Hill was the one who had to say these awful things that she alleges Clarence Thomas said to her. So it's almost like they have to relive it. So a lot of people. So I think he did a very good job of explaining why victims don't want to speak up. She also talks about Desiree Washington, that beauty pageant contestant winner who she was raped by Mike Tyson because he was found guilty and went to prison for 3 years. But also how the media ate her alive, and they show clips from, like, Barbara Walters interviewing her and kind of making it seem like
you knew what was going on.
You knew what was going on. You're a pretty girl. You went up to a hotel room with this person at 2:00 in the morning. What did you think? So, but then she also outlines other people who came out and spoke out, and then that gave her the courage to speak up. So this documentary does a good job of setting the stage for why Drew Dixon is doing this.
Yeah, and I enjoyed seeing, because they also have Sil Lai Abrams and Jenny Lumet featured, who also had come forward with allegations, and how the three of them shared kind of a bond over this, and became a support system for one another.
Drew Dixon also alleges that, so after her time at Def Jam, she took a break and then decided to try to get back into music and got a job with Arista Records under Clive Davis. But when Clive Davis left and L.A. Reid took over, things changed. And L.A. Reid was sexually inappropriate with her as well. And when she rebuffed his advances, she alleges that he basically ruined her career. So she tells stories of how she discovered Kanye West, tried to bring Kanye West into L.A. Reid, and he refused to see him because he didn't like Drew Dixon, because she wouldn't give him what he wanted. She also says that she discovered John Legend and tried to have a session with him and all the execs, and L.A. Reid like refused to go and told all the execs not to go because he was upset at Drew Dixon. So, you know, those are pretty powerful allegations by her.
Well, and, you know, and difficult to prove, like the difficulty of proving quid pro quo.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's why it's important that we have to carve out these spaces to have these conversations.
Yeah. So I have a few notes. Do you have anything else?
No.
So, another note I wrote down is because at one point they talk about like the quality of the victim. So people seeming like these women are credible, so we should believe them. And I just thought like, you know, yeah, these women, the three main women, you know, they do seem more credible. Right, because one of them has, you know, comes from like a famous family. Well, Drew Dixon's mom was the mayor of D.C.
Yeah, in the early 90s, yeah.
She, you know, Drew Dixon went to Stanford. So these are like, and then the other one.
Jenny Lumet is the daughter of Sidney Lumet, the film director who directed The Wiz and Serpico and many other films, and the granddaughter of Lena Horne. I mean...
So they acknowledge, because the three of them kind of get together towards the end and talk about this, and they acknowledge that they have a privilege, not only by their aesthetic, but also just as who they are as people, that people will take them more seriously. So I thought that was interesting and important to understand, because if these three women would have been like, you know, as they say, video hoes, and no one would have taken them seriously, right? Because their business was to sell sex. So it's a blurry line. The other thing I thought or wanted to say was I think like it doesn't really matter. Like this isn't about like us deciding if Russell Simmons did these things. Like it's not about that. Like I have come to understand that we need to believe the victims. Like if people say these things happen to them, we need to believe them, because it's not so easy to just make these claims and move on. This will destroy a person's life. So this is very serious for someone to, you know, have the courage to get up and say these things. And also for Russell Simmons, I feel like, you know, whether he did it or not, he sold a brand that was based on misogyny and objectifying women. And, you know, in the documentary, there are several clips of him talking about how he likes tall, skinny models and how he can't resist women. And so, you know, all this namaste nonsense that he's talking about nowadays is in stark contrast to how he was in the 90s. And, you know, the documentary is smart enough to play music under Def Jam. So very popular records that we all know who enjoy hip hop. And these lyrics are troubling.
Yeah.
You know, I love the music, but the lyrics are problematic. At best, they're problematic.
Well, and especially if you're listening to them and they refer demeaningly to who you are.
So it's like, you know, your entire brand, what you sold, is adjacent to the allegations that are made against you. So it's kind of like, you know, again, there are no charges against either of these men, but it doesn't look good. No.
But again, well, you know, it's just like many of the women against Weinstein, the statute of limitations, you know, Annabella Sciorra, I think it was still important for her to get up on the stand and tell her story, even though there's really nothing that could be done at this point for her. Like,
right.
So that's the point. Like, maybe they never will be charged with anything, but
the message allows other people to feel safe to come out. So yeah, I mean, it's effective. I feel like we can't really rate this documentary.
I agree.
It's not about being entertained, but it's informative. It's
Oh, and shout out to Terrence Blanchard, Spike Lee's composer, who he provided the score for the documentary.
Anything else?
No, that's it.
All right, bye.
Bye.